You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I have a really interesting guest with me, Kevin Dillard, who is the CEO and co-founder of Clear Blue Smiles. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you, Dr. Roxy. Good to be here.
Thank you. It's great to have you. So for our audience, just to get started, tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been innovating these days.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I'm a lawyer by trade. I spent about 18 years at the American Association of Orthodontists here where I live in St. Louis. Not a lot of people know, by the way, interesting aside, that modern orthodontics was actually invented in St. Louis, which is why the association is here. It's the oldest, largest dental specialty in the world, actually, and has a pretty large reach. So I spent 18 years there, most of the time as their general counsel. So the chief lawyer, chief spokesperson in later days about clear aligner therapy and some of the various companies that have innovated in the sector and what they've been doing with advertising and treatment. But the entire 18-year span, I spent in Washington, D.C., doing some lobbying coordination with Congress and the federal administration and working with those folks and generally getting to know and work with a lot of different orthodontists. Being inside the industry, working with the board of trustees, working with various volunteers, and working with other companies that service the industry, some of the big names that everybody would know.
Yeah. And so then what led you to Clear Blue Smiles?
Well, for the last 5-6 years that I was there, I would say since about 2015, there was a large influx of change in the industry where for a very long time, decades actually, if not since the inception of modern orthodontics, most orthodontics, I would say 90% plus, were done entirely by orthodontists in a brick and mortar setting. Mm-hmm. Where you go with the traditional, almost everybody's had it at some point, right? You go to the orthodontist when you're 13, 14 years old, you get your braces. You're treated for a couple of years, you go into retention, and you're going to the orthodontist once a month. Around 1999, the big innovation was Invisalign, Align Corporation. They came in with really the first big brand name clear aligner therapy, which could then take some people's smiles and instead of using the metal brackets and wires, be able to move people's teeth with plastic, which a lot of folks at the time, especially adults, really liked because adults in particular don't want to be burdened with the stigma, perhaps, of wearing metal braces. And then in about 2015, a couple of companies came in that are big names, traded on the NASDAQ right now. And they said, well, you don't even need to see an orthodontist or a dentist. All you need to do is take an impression of your teeth originally with the old, what they call alginate or PVC things that most people had if they had braces where you kind of bite in this gooey stuff.
Yep. I've done that.
It's not a pleasant experience, but what they would do is sell those kits, and then a dentist or orthodontist would review that record and then design a treatment based around clear aligner therapy and then mail it to the patient. Well, they could afford to do that for much cheaper than a traditional brick and mortar practice for a variety of reasons. There's no brick and mortar orthodontist to pay, no landscaping bills, no dental assistants, no x-ray machines. What they were missing, though, and what I would often say when I was a spokesperson on this exact issue with the American Association of Orthodontists, reporters would always want to know, well, what's wrong with this? And I would say, well, let's step back and let's not talk about it in terms of right or wrong. Let's talk about what the patient is not getting as opposed to a traditional brick and mortar practice. And there are a number of things that they're not getting. One is assurance that it's even healthy to move any teeth, regardless of how bad their bite or occlusion is, what they call it in the trade. Because if you don't know what the roots look like underneath the gum line, and if you don't have a real good picture of your gum health or periodontal health, you don't know if it's safe to move those teeth. And if you start applying force to teeth, you could actually lose the teeth or lose gum tissue. And in fact, there were some media reports of that happening. At the same time, though, it became pretty clear that the traditional orthodontists were pushing back against any kind of innovation. They wanted to dig their heels in and say, Every patient, regardless, should go to a brick and mortar orthodontist. And I and a couple of orthodontists that I had known for a very long time, one in particular, Bill Crutchfield, I had known him for since 2004, I believe, through various work at the AO. We kind of had a similar idea and said, well, there is a way to do this. Not every single patient, as a matter of fact, quite a few, maybe even a majority, don't need to come into an orthodontic practice once a month or once every other month, and they can still have their orthodontics achieved safely and effectively. You just need two things. And those two things are comprehensive diagnostics at the beginning of treatment to make sure that that treatment is safe, and then rigorous ongoing monitoring virtually. And if we put those two things together, we believe that even the most established traditional orthodontists would take a look at that and say, you know what, I would be comfortable treating patients in this scenario, even if I never see them. I just need to see the diagnostics and leverage the incredible artificial intelligence that's available with patients using their smartphones to be able to take pictures and videos of their own teeth. So what we did is say, this is it is possible for some patients to do it safely and effectively. We need those two things.
So what I think is so incredible about the story that you just told is, a lot of the research that I've done when it comes to market entry, like at what point as an innovator are we going to enter into the market? There's a lot of myth around being first to market is like the winning strategy, right? So that would be kind of like Visalign that you just described about 20 years ago, right? They create a whole new category within the space. But what you just described is a very thorough competitive analysis over a period of time, and really being able to identify where that value gap is, and then being able to create a positioning strategy and a brand, a whole platform or solution around that value gap. And I think that's a missed opportunity for most innovators to actually look at it really strategically like that and figure out what space that they could own as a late entrant or, a last follower into the market. That's one of the advantages that you have, is that you didn't have to go through the expense of creating the category or creating the solution, right? And creating awareness and education around this phenomenon. But what you do have is you get a chance to see where do they fail, or where is the gap that there's still a market that's not being serviced, and then creating a solution or a business model around that. And so it's just brilliant. And I want to make sure I'm pointing that out for the listeners, because it's something that we should all do. I find that sometimes people fall into the trap of, well, I want to go and be Visalign, and I want to me too that, right? I want to create something that's just like them because they've got significant market share. They've had a lot of success. So let me go and do what they did. And it can be, but it's usually not a profitable. So you might have a business, but it might not be a profitable business. Whereas what you're doing, what you're describing is really very different. Brilliant.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And as a matter of fact, I mean, to your point, we had, when we were, in every business cycle or in every business startup, you kind of have the concept. And before you go forward with branding and spend the money on websites and starting to go to market strategy, so to speak, I think a good idea, which is what we did, was take it to some of the people that we really trust. And orthodontists and people in the industry, not necessarily orthodontists, but marketing folks who had worked at some of these big companies, and said, "Here's our concept. What do you think of this?" And many of them actually suggested we do exactly what you said. Well, why don't you go for those really the low end market, the low value targets, the very cheap, for lack of a better term, cheap strategy, because there's a lot of money down there. And the response was, well, first of all, it's crowded. I mean, there's a number of businesses who are doing that. Smile Direct Club, Bite, Candid are kind of operating on that model, along with some others. And we said, that's not what we're in it for. We're in it because we love the field of orthodontics, and we want to protect their expertise because we respect the expertise. Even though I'm not an orthodontist, I benefited from a very, complex case when I was 13 years old. If I was 13 years old now, I would not be a candidate for my own company's product. I would necessarily have to go to an orthodontist. And we kind of saw that market slipping away from many of them. And we said, we're in this to help existing orthodontists, traditional orthodontists, to be able to offer a service that competes at a very, very high level with some of those other people who are in taking that market share away from them. So, yeah, I agree. I think.
So one of the things I think is so interesting, and I want to just kind of dig into this a little bit, is you're a lawyer by trade, right? By your background. And when I think of lawyers and legal teams that I've worked with over the years, they're usually really risk averse.
Yeah.
Right. So someone like myself that comes from a marketing background, there's usually a lot of wrestling that happens between marketing and legal, right? Like, yes, we can say this. No, we can't. Yes, we can build. No, we can't, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, in all of my 25 years of career, I've never come across a lawyer that was also an entrepreneur because it's like such a high risk, like bold move, right? It's like you believe in something that doesn't exist, right? You're a pioneer, a change agent. So just kind of talk about what that journey was like for you from, I don't want to say transitioning away because you're still a lawyer, transitioning into the world of entrepreneurship.
Well, that's a great question. I appreciate the point being made there. I spent my entire time as a lawyer. I'm kind of unique in this regard in the legal field. I spent the entire time as a lawyer, as an in-house corporate counsel, which is a very different animal than law firms. And we worked with many law firms that I hired just to do outside legal work, from contract work to probably the most important thing in any trade association, which is antitrust. And that's where it gets really, a lawyer there has to be very sensitive to statements, actions, motives that could be anti-competitive in the market. Because what you essentially have in an association is a group of competitors coming together. There's the obvious natural human tendency to protect their market, protect the prices, protect margins. And, in a free market society with the Sherman Antitrust Act, that's just not legal. But at the same time, my job there was both to protect the association but not just say you can't do that. I was leaned on very heavily there to say not just that you can't do that, but if this is your ultimate goal, you can't do this, but you can do A, B, and C, and another way to do it. So it was forced me to be in a more strategic role, which I enjoyed. In saying, there might be some things you can't do that you want to do, but if the end goal is something, there's another way to do it that would be okay. Which, in that strategic thinking, works very closely and is I think served me well in developing strategies for business, not just legal strategies, but developing how we attack a certain market or go about putting together certain deals.
So did you leave the AAO and decide to start Clear Loose Miles? Was it that decision that you were making of like, I'm leaving in-house counsel, I'm leaving this kind of corporate job, if you will, to be an entrepreneur, or was it some other transition?
I love the fact when I was there was a leadership change, and at the top with the CEO, and there was a lot of change going on. And I know maybe this sounds a little corny, I don't know, but I thought at the time it's time. I had been there for 18 years. I had seen the market move. I see what's happening. I'm going to be able to affect change and be able to move into this market and innovate in a way that protects the profession that I respect in a profitable way. And I can affect that change better on the outside than I can on the inside. Because, I'm a energetic kind of go-getter kind of guy, strategic thinker, and associations, for the value that they serve in our society, can sometimes move very slowly and be very bureaucratic. And you're dealing with, in the case of the AAO, there's probably 500 orthodontists who are involved in leadership at some level that have a say in what's happening. And I love them all. They're great people. But in any kind of organization like that, things move more slowly than in an organization where there are three decision makers. So it's been a pleasure kind of transitioning out of that to be able to say, if the owners of the company and the chief employees come together and say, we have an idea. We want to do this. If it makes sense, we don't need to go through a 9-month process of councils and committees and boards to be able to do it. We just do it. And that's right. That's a great thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so we kind of touched on positioning a little bit, but messaging, right? So what was that journey like for you from a messaging strategy of like really being able to hone in that succinct value proposition in a way that's going to resonate quickly and significantly with the target audience?
Yeah. So, one of the benefits of being at the AO is I was privy to a lot of information, that was publicly available that you just kind of see talked about. And, back, we were talking a few minutes ago about the market and where we fit in the market. Mm-hmm. And a lot of challenges that startups have that fortunately we don't have is proving why they need to exist or proving that there's a market there. And in our case, it was really obvious that there's obviously a market for orthodontic treatment where you don't have to go to an office. That's obvious. Those companies are out there. They're worth billions of dollars. There's obviously a market for brick and mortar, high touch, high quality, very expensive treatment. They've been around for 100 years. Mm-hmm. And it was just obvious to us that the vast middle market here is available to say, well, you can, but if you don't want treatment for you or your child that you're not completely comfortable with, and you still don't want to go to the orthodontist, there's another option, and that's us. But we also like to tell a story, and I'm happy to say our firm that we work with to come up with our brand, our logo, has won some awards recently about our logo because we like to tell a story, which I think is important for any startup, no matter what they're doing, is to explain not only what they do, obviously, in their place in the market, but have a little bit of fun with it and tell an actual story that kind of makes sense. Which I'm happy, and I'm glad when we started this company and came up with the logo design and the name that we have a story, and we're proud to tell it to patients and doctors.
Yeah. And I think we can't ever overestimate the power of storytelling and the role that storytelling plays in that commercialization journey. Mm-hmm. Right. Being able to like create that emotional appeal and mm-hmm. be able to have a story that people can resonate with, and then be able to have word of mouth marketing. Now they're sharing mm-hmm. that story with other people. It's just, right. It's so powerful. Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. So you've done a really good job of creating a platform for your personal brand that then also lends itself really well to the platform that you have, for the company. And I was really surprised to, see that you've launched your own podcast show. Typically, I'm arm wrestling clients trying to convince them that this is like the most incredible business strategy that they should be deploying right now. And, so what was that like for you making that decision? And how does all of the stuff that you've done in the past kind of also lead into this platform?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the past. About 5 or 6 years ago, working at the American Association of Orthodontists, we had the idea to start a podcast there. And it was just audio only at the time, because this was before pre-COVID and before the Zoom became ubiquitous. Yep. And it was a way at the association to kind of cut through some of that red tape. I mentioned earlier, it sometimes takes 9 months. And there were several print vehicles there that we would use to communicate to membership. But we had the idea, we could do this very cost effectively and very quickly. Just cut a video. Or I'm sorry, cut a podcast audio. Yep. And one of the folks in the marketing that had worked there for a long time, had used to work for one of the big radio stations here in St. Louis, KMOX. She had a great radio voice. And we would just sit down and chat, and we'd talk about some of the news happening in the industry, a Supreme Court case that dealt with dental board regulations, or we would talk about a new legal contract guide that we had put out on the website. And it took maybe an hour to produce. Yep. And to do, and a couple $100 in equipment to make it sound really good. And what do you know? Within a couple of weeks, we had thousands of hits on these things, and people were writing in and saying, cover this topic or cover that topic. And the funny thing of it is, Dr. Roxy, it all kind of started with self-interest. Because as a lawyer at the AO, I love
your honesty.
We would get calls while it wasn't our job to be the personal lawyer for members of the AO. My assistant and I would field probably between the two of us 10 to 15 calls a day from orthodontists saying, what do I do if a patient stops paying me? Or what do I do if this or that? And I had the idea, I was like, we need to just cut the standard answer that we say 10 times a day and mass disseminate it, which is what we did. And that kind of worked. So it kind of saved some phone calls for my assistant and myself. But, having gone through that experience, then moving forward into Clear Blue Smiles, we thought, because a part of our corporate responsibility in the industry is preserving the integrity and the expertise of orthodontics, we want to kind of tell their story. And we want to take some of the top orthodontists, whether they're involved with Clear Blue Smiles or not. Because between me and the other founders, we know a lot of folks who have a very interesting story in orthodontics, and we want to just talk to them, talk about their stories, talk about where they went to school, what led them into the practice. Some of them, it's a family business. Their fathers, grandfathers were in it. Others, it wasn't. And just talk about kind of what led them into it, some of the things that they have experienced as an orthodontist that gives them faith in the industry and faith in what they do, because almost without exception, of the thousands of orthodontists I've met, they all have one thing in common. They all have a deep heart to help people, and they get great satisfaction in taking a child who, for instance, has terrible malocclusion, cleft palate even, and donating their time or really working with the parents to give that child a smile that they go from, walking around school, never wanting to smile or doing this, to being having the self-confidence of a great smile. And so we want to talk to them about that and just talk about the industry and hopefully encourage more patients and more dental students to seek that out as a profession, so that it just keeps getting better and better.
So what kind of business impact has the show had, and maybe it hasn't just yet, but when I think about, it can be a lot of heavy lifting to do it. There's tons of shows that start out, but they don't stay consistent with it, because you've got, to kind of commit on a consistent basis to record the episodes, the kind of post-production of that. And so there's always a question around, like, well, what is the ROI of a podcast show? How is that really going to impact our business? So what's your perspective on that?
It's impossible to tell ROI just yet, because it's kind of a new initiative. And frankly, I got to tell you, it takes time and time is opportunity cost. At the same time, I'm not too concerned about a return on investment in terms of profit. I look at it in terms more of an ideological perspective, kind of like I did when we started the company. Like, we're in this for more than profit. We're in this to tell a story, to innovate, to protect the integrity of orthodontics. And, if we don't get thousands and thousands of viewers, or if we don't get more business from it, that's okay. We'll probably continue doing it, just because we have a passion for telling that story and upholding the tradition of the profession.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that come to mind on how I've used it, because I've been doing it for a couple of years now, is, it's market research, right? So
it's true.
You're staying close to the customer on a regular basis to be able to understand, because, as customers, we're not static, right? And so if the customer needs change, you've got an immediate pulse on that, because you're having conversations with them. It allows you to kind of really stay much more customer focused, as opposed to like the technology technology or solution focused, right? And then content. I mean, when you're talking about building awareness and generating demand, like you introduce one show, one episode, and have 30 to 50 pieces of content. Like you said earlier, social media teams love this stuff, right? And it's original content. It's not going to be something that, you just that's like out there on a regular basis. You've got these incredible stories to be able to tell. Besides the fact that, from what I sense from you, you're having conversations with people that could be your potential customers. So you're not pitching them on the podcast, but you're building a relationship, and that's where it all begins, right?
Right. Absolutely. And actually, I miss that aspect of it. One of my favorite things that I did at the AAO is, and this is another, by the way, self-interest kind of thing that turned into something better. To kind of preempt some of those legal questions we get, we designed a legal risk management course for orthodontic residents. So before they go out into practice, we designed, like, here are the 16 things, the 16 legal issues you'll face before you ever open your practice within the first year of having a practice, whether you're in business with somebody else or in your solo practice. Anything from contracts to standard of ethics kind of things. And I would travel around, and I went everywhere from New York, NYU to Florida to California and everywhere in between. And I would always, before I would get into it, I would introduce myself, and then I would have each of the residents talk about themselves. And most of these courses were for between 6 and 18 orthodontic residents. So not a huge crowd, but a good intimate crowd, a good number to be able to get to know them. And I would always ask them 3 questions: where they plan, or how they plan to practice, and what kind of practice they are going to be in. If they signed a contract with that yet, where they're going to live. And then, the 4th question was, what about the industry concerns you the most? Not you specifically, but what about generally the industry? Yeah. And you talk about, I didn't even know it at the time, but that was valuable market research for what I'm doing now. And, being able to ask those same questions and talk to folks and get that kind of connection you're right. It is market research, even though it's not really the reason we do it.
Right. It's huge. It really is huge. And even if you don't document it, you remember those conversations. Sure. And when you're looking at your growth strategy going forward, and whatever lane or view that would be, you kind of remember. And then what I love is also, like, the more people you interview, then the more patterns you start to see. So you probably saw that in your seminar students. You go, wow, you know what? Like, the majority of them are talking about this. And then there's just a whole lot of implications of just being able to know them better.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, they 100% of the hundreds of residents I talked to answered that 4th question the same way. That question being, what concerns you the most about the future of the industry? I don't remember any of them saying anything other than, I'm really concerned that this rise of what they would call do-it-yourself dentistry and do-it-yourself orthodontics is going to devalue our role in patients' health. And I mean, there you go. I mean, that's
and you're like, I got a business for you. I got a business for me and for you. Here we go.
I mean, and I didn't know it, but several years later, that became sort of the reason for our existence.
Yeah, yeah. What I think is so interesting about what you're describing here, whether it was, intentional or not, is you're really talking about this hybrid model, right? And so in hindsight, when we look back, prior to COVID, you had tons of entities that really focused on brick and mortar businesses. And with a lot of that drying up, especially in healthcare with access, trade shows and, just being able to travel and all that stuff being changed and coming to a complete halt, for almost a year and a half, lots of people shifted to virtual engagement, right? Telehealth. So you kind of were doing this, I guess, before COVID, but now a lot of businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators are kind of at this crossroad. Do they go all the way back to brick and mortar? Do they stay virtual? And I think what we're going to find to be more successful is this hybrid that you just described, giving consumers the convenience of doing whatever they want to do, wherever they want to do it, but not diminishing the face-to-face stuff that still has to take place.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think while we didn't know it, of course, when we started launching the brand, and
You didn't know there
contracting
would
with
be a
doctors.
global pandemic?
We didn't know. Yeah, who knew there would be this pandemic? But
Yeah.
it probably, I mean, we saw, I and the other founders probably were foreseeing before the pandemic, we were foreseeing a move towards this kind of model, which really what we would describe it as, it's a teleorthodontic model for traditional orthodontists.
Yep.
It's kind of helping them move their practice into the practice of the future, where they can spend more time on patients that really need the in-person help and still have revenue streams and have a lot of patients that they can monitor virtually. And it actually makes their practice more efficient to be able to do it that way. But anyway, we kind of foresaw that moving towards that more of that kind of model within like 5 to 6 years pre-COVID. I think now COVID, certainly in the minds of the consumer, obviously has changed a lot of things. If it can be done virtually, it's going to be done virtually, from grocery delivery to medicine. For a lot of orthodontists, I think and dentists too, I think it sped up their timeline to come to that conclusion from 5 to 6 years to almost immediately, if not
less than 30
shortening
days,
it by years. Right. And it's obvious to everybody, I think, that market is there, and that people, if they can do it virtually and they're assured and they know and they feel comfortable that what they're getting is the same quality, or if not better quality than the in-person interaction, they're going to do it virtually.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last question I have for you before we wrap up here is around B2C, B2B, B2B2C, right? So what were some of the things that you kind of wrestled with or contemplated around your commercialization strategy? You're in a multi-sided market, very similar to healthcare, right? Where you there has to have that the B2B and the B2C involved.
Sure.
And I think that you guys have done a really good job at doing both well. So just talk about that a little bit for our listeners.
Sure. It's been an interesting, very steep learning curve, because there are some companies that we've mentioned, that do entirely advertising direct to consumer, which of course is extremely expensive.
Yep.
Because you're not only trying to build brand awareness, you're trying to convince them of something. We are kind of a hybrid model. We are advertising and working with doctors and dentists, many of whom, by the way, it takes some time to explain, because it's a new model and they don't quite understand it. And once they understand what we're doing, they think, well, wait a minute, this doesn't cost any money. You're sending me patients, you're paying me. This is no money out of pocket for me.
This is too good to be true. I must be missing
sounds
something.
Too good to be true. And that, honestly, I got to tell you, that's probably our biggest roadblock is in talking to dentists and saying, no, this isn't too good to be true. It's a new way of doing business. It's a little bit more risk for us, of course, because we're taking some of the financial risk.
Yeah.
But that's the bargain. You have to do at some point. But what we're finding is the direct consumer, speaking directly about marketing, direct consumer, actually, we don't have to do a lot of it to figure out what really works well. And what has worked well is a sale to the patients that we're going after, which generally it's parents of children who are aware that this direct consumer, if you want to call it that model, where you never have to see anybody, exists, but they would never trust that for their own kids or themselves. But they are aware that virtual treatment's possible. And so here is the perfect marriage of tradition and technology, where one visit gets them everything they need. And then with a minute or two with their smartphone a month, they can do their virtual checkups. So what we're finding is we can take that marketing and take it to prospective dentists that we're working with and say, look, this is what we're telling people. We have patients, potential patients coming into us now. I won't say in droves, but a lot. And, here's an existing patient base for you that we can link you up with and give them a service that you are well positioned to provide.
Sure. Yeah. And who's going to turn that down?
Who's going to turn that down? Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Derek, thank you so much. It's been such a great opportunity to speak with you today. And thank you for sharing so many insights with us. How do folks get a hold of you if anybody wants to reach out to you after?
They can always check out our website, www.clearbluesmiles.com. You can reach my email directly. It's pretty easy. It's Kevin@clearbluesmiles.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.